Well, my guest is a writer, an engineer, an entrepreneur, and a storyteller. I should add a globetrotter. Kevin Albright's greatest joy is being a husband and father. He's married to Holly, has been for 17 years. He has two children who are 15 and 13. He lives in Oakville, and that all sounds so normal. And as this story unfolds, it's probably going to make you want to discover the backstory on people you might be sitting with in church on Sunday. It's sure a surprise. Finding My Father, a journey from the father who caused the scars to the father who healed them. Kevin, welcome. This was a journal for your family.
It started out that way, and thank you for inviting me to the show this morning. It's a real honor to be here. Really love the show.
We're hearing this often these days, that people have felt they want to leave their spiritual history with their children, with their loved ones, and we end up holding a marvelous book.
It's a real important part of our heritage and our families, especially as fathers, is passing along that transition from your earthly father to your heavenly father.
In this case, a very shocking. Let's take you to Southern California, where your story begins as a PK, a preacher's kid. Your dad's quite a shining star.
Yeah, when I was a kid, my dad was the pastor of a very dynamic church in Southern California. And when I grew up, I wanted to be just like him. He had his own radio show and was in the media all the time. That is until that Wednesday night when my world was ripped apart in a way that I could have never have imagined. I was a happy kid up to that point. And what had happened that really set my journey into a trajectory was my mother stayed home from church one evening. It was a Wednesday night, and my father took us to church. Didn't think a whole lot about that. That seemed relatively normal. But when my dad dropped us off and he sped away as the pastor, that did seem a little bit strange.
He wasn't preaching that night?
No, there was a guest speaker that night.
That's right.
Well, church ended as normal, and nobody showed up to pick us up. And eventually, one of the other families at our church said we'd be staying with them. So we went to their house, and a week went by, and things started to seem very odd.
Well, you didn't see your mom or dad?
Didn't see anybody. They just figured my mom wasn't feeling well, excuse me, and really didn't know what was going on, but we weren't allowed to go to school. We couldn't watch TV, and whenever the newspaper would show up, it would be shuffled away very quickly. Now, let's face it, at age 9, I didn't read the paper a whole lot, but it still seemed real different and strange. And then my aunt showed up, and I knew something was wrong. You see, my aunt didn't live in the area. She lived a long ways away, and when she showed up, it was a very somber emotion at that point. And she had told us...
point out that you had a sister and a brother.
Oh, yes, I'm sorry.
Also with you.
My little brother and my sister, my two siblings, we were all there together. And my aunt said that they had been waiting for my mom to be well enough to explain what had happened and that we were going to go live with her. Now, as a 9-year-old, my mind just went into overdrive and was spinning in circles, and I'm thinking, why are we going to live with her? We have our own nice home, and why is Mom in the hospital? And by the way, what happened to our dad? Where's he been? Anyway, she took us to the hospital where there was a host of police officers and people, and we went into the intensive care. My sister and I, my little brother was too young, and they didn't let him go in there. And I remember my mom in that room with a million wires connected and these monitors, and she began to unfold this story, this horrific event that took place that Wednesday.
I think the first thing she said was, "Don't hate your father."
Yes. And that just spun questions in my mind. Well, she told us of how a lady had broken into her home, beat her with a lead pipe, and shot at her, emptied the gun, shooting at her. and then left her for dead. Now, by the grace of God, after she had left, my mom was able to get to the neighbors and get help. And I thought my world was crushed and just destroyed beyond anything I could ever imagine. And then she told me that my dad was behind the whole thing. And then my world really fell apart. This was the guy that I wanted to be like. This was the guy that I trusted as a kid. And from there, we I never saw my friends again, never went back to school. My life was just ripped out of its
moorings completely.
Completely. And we went to live with my aunt. Now, this is where the story begins, and this is where the book begins. But this is not where the journey ends. It's where my journey began to take me from the father that caused the scars in my life to the one that healed them.
An interesting thing about you as a young boy, I mean, you look to Dad as your hero. You loved being in church. You played church. You were very aware of the presence of God through your childhood.
Absolutely.
And in spite of this trauma, you continued to experience God in a difficult journey.
Without a doubt. God was there at every turn, even though I was broken, and really acted out in ways that fatherless kids very commonly do. A lot of feelings of abandonment and feelings that things were all my fault and that I wasn't worthy. And where these come from, as a kid, you don't know. You just know you feel them but don't understand why. But God stood in every single one of those situations and used every one of them to draw me closer to Him. And this was something that I didn't realize until I was older and went through another terrible experience where God stopped my life and said, look, I've been here your whole life, trust me now. Now, I did look up my father about 20 years after, and I had dreamt of what a dad would be like for many years because there was a piece of me missing. And when I would dream of a father, he would be somebody who would never abandon me, somebody who would always love me and help me through this life. Well, to try to fill that hole, I went and I found my father, my earthly dad, and I knew him for a few years, which was very
You stayed
difficult.
in touch with him
I
after
stayed in
you
touch with him for a
reconnected.
couple of years. But I realized that he wasn't the father that I had dreamt of all my life, and that the father that I had dreamt of was already with me. And that my Heavenly Father walked with me through all of these times. And there's a lot of miracles in there, but God's very personal. It's the day-to-day little things that He cares about you, not that He's out there to show the world. And He walks with me today. And my Heavenly Father is everything that I could have ever dreamt of. And you can't ask for a better dad.
You know, the process, you've kind of summed it up very neatly, and there's nothing neat about this book. In fact, I just want to go back to your mom. I mean, a gun was emptied, pointed at her and emptied, and not one bullet struck her.
That's correct.
Which is one of a number of evidences of God intervening, surely, unless the shooter was on drugs. I mean, how could she miss every time? The book is laced, if you've read This Present Darkness or Piercing the Darkness by Frank Peretti, you've had a look at what goes on in the cosmos. It's not a little white guy and a little red guy. It's angels and demons who are battling it out in the spiritual war zone we live in. And you keep coming back to that and what they might have been up to as your complex story unfolds.
Yes, absolutely. In the story, it weaves three parts. One of the parts peels back that spiritual realm and takes a look at not only the battle that is taking place for our souls in really this temporary place that we live on earth, which is just our beginning, but more importantly, takes a look at where my Heavenly Father stood in that gap and walked me through and used those destructive behaviors and decisions to draw me to Him.
One of those decisions was a chapter you call Tied and Knotted,
Yes,
a marriage that shouldn't have happened.
yes.
And I just want to read this paragraph just to hear the heart. How old would you be here where you're
19,
well, you were young,
very young.
very young. I found a church to attend and even tried to get Rhonda to join me, but usually I went alone. I can remember sitting in the pew screaming in my soul for a dad or something to heal my soul. I usually couldn't concentrate on the preacher or connect with the others who attended. Everywhere I went, I continually looked over my shoulder, wondering if my dad might be there. It just is, you know, as we've heard many times, identity and destiny is tied to the father relationship. And so we feel it. We feel that soul reaching and yearning through the whole journey. You did go into therapy.
Yes,
You say it's the hardest and best thing you ever did,
absolutely.
and made the decision to connect with that. It was a missing piece, and it took you time to find your dad. I think one of the alarming things, one of several, is that your dad and the other woman only did 2 years in prison.
Yes.
And now they're living happily together back in the old neighborhood. Now, would that not just make you a little angry at God? Did that look like justice to you?
You know, there's a lot of things in life, and that being one of them, that I questioned, you know, why God? Why do bad things happen, and why is justice not appear to be done? And I have to come back to, I'm not perfect, and God forgave me. And if I couldn't forgive my dad and walk away from that situation and connect with my Heavenly Father, I could never be who God wanted me to be. And God has taken all of that, and even this piece of my journey is just amazing how God is so awesome. How God put the people together to make this happen. The fact that I'm sitting here this morning is a miracle in and of its own.
Yeah, we can't even unpack some of the other scary chapters
Yes.
in this book. Your mother, I have to ask about your dear mom.
Yes.
How is she?
My mom is doing great. She is involved in a ministry today. She remarried several years later to a wonderful guy. And she actually went back to Bible school after this. And God has used her to speak at women's conferences. And
What a
things like that.
story. Maybe a movie. I want to quote one of the most important things I read in your book. My Heavenly Father has crossed my path with wonderful people who answered the call, took action, and helped shape my life into what it is today.
Yes.
The men at Burlington Alliance are a big part of, well, we probably wouldn't have this book if not for their prayers and encouragement.
Yes.
And I can't believe you meet at 5:30 every Saturday morning.
And I am not a morning person, but it's an addictive group because God walks there. And I tell you, when just like everything in my life, I look back and I see this tapestry of where God put people in my life at the right place at the right time. They don't know each other, but God used them to take me where He has me going. And I was actually flying back from Los Angeles on a event that I had to be at. And I remember praying to God that I need a group of guys that I can connect with. I landed the next day. A friend of mine said, "Hey, I just found this great group of guys over at Burlington Alliance. Would you like to join me?" It's early in the morning. I said, "Man, God opened the doors, I'm there." And I've been there ever since. And God has used that group and the guys in that group to encourage me. And as I started sharing my story, several of them started saying, "You know, you need to write that down. You need to share that." Although I tell you, when I very first walked in, I was going through a very, very difficult time. And I told the guys that, "Hey, the situation I'm in is going to take a miracle." And their response was, "We know the one that does those."
I've said it many times in conversations with people who call in a mess of some sort. When I ask Do you have a caring group of believers who are walking with you, praying with you? No, I stopped going to church years ago, or they're disconnected. They're out there alone, and that's opportunity for the enemy, big time.
Big time opportunity. It's the power of prayer is beyond what we really understand. And until you walk down that path and you get people praying in a situation and you see things happening, when you walk away from other followers and believers, you don't have that covering of people to pray with you, people to hold you up and to help you through this life.
It's such an important encouragement. And you say, our perspective on life would change if only we knew how much God has been involved. And we sure see it in this journey. So many stories. You're going to have to get the book. And you'll be surprised at what we left out. Believe me. Our e-store is the place you can go right now to get your copy of Finding My Father by Kevin Albright. Crossroads.ca or 1-800-265-3100. Glad to know, Kevin, you're kind of close. You're just down the road when you're home.
Absolutely.
Thanks for coming today.
My pleasure. Absolutely.